just while he's typing the password in, off screen, I'll introduce you to Damian. He runs the developer advocacy at GitHub and loves all things DevOps. Formerly a cloud advocate at Microsoft for 4 years, and prior to that, a dev at Octopus Deploy and an Microsoft MVP. Damian has 20+ year background in software development and consulting in a broad range of industries. He regularly speaks at conferences, just like this, user groups and other events around the world. Sorry, that was mean. This is not his fault.
just like this, actually. Right.
So let's give Damian a big, long welcome as he sets himself up.
This is going well. I'm going to skip all my slides because that's a boring bit anyway. And I'm just going to go straight to demo. So my name's Damian Brady. I work at GitHub. I lead our developer advocacy team. I came from Microsoft. I've talked about DevOps for years. This time I'm going to be talking about DevOps in terms of doing it all on GitHub. Right? So we're going to be going from planning and tracking all the way through to the inner loop, like actually writing code in the cloud on Codespaces, and then actions to deploy, like with a CI/CD pipeline, all the way through to the end. Right? Now, I started about 15 minutes late, so let's see how quickly we can do this. If I skip over stuff, and you're like, I really want to know more about that, we have all of this demo stuff at the GitHub booth as well, so come and have a look. The difference in the GitHub booth, though, is that everything's running off a Raspberry Pi. So I'm doing multi-container development, debugging and stuff, but my dev machine's this Raspberry Pi hanging from a carabiner next to the TV. We'll see some of that in a sec. Not the Raspberry Pi, but the Codespaces. Right, so DevOps. You've all seen that kind of sideways 8, like the infinity symbol that we talk about with DevOps, where we do plan, build, deploy, and then learn from that. The idea with DevOps being that you can get through that whole infinity symbol as quickly as possible. So get stuff out to production as quickly as possible so you can learn from it and work out what needs to be done next. Right? What I'm going to focus on today is everything from the plan bit all the way through to production. Right? We're not really going to talk so much about the learning from it. GitHub doesn't have a product for looking at metrics of things that are going on in production. We do have awesome kind of tooling around discussions with your communities, and of course there's GitHub Issues that can be open, so the community can contribute as well, or your customers can contribute as well to what you're doing. But we're not going to really cover that part so much beyond just issues. All right, I'm already talking too much. Let's go and have a look. You can see a little bit about some of the security stuff that's built in here as well. Dependabot has told me that my code has security vulnerabilities, which is deliberate, I promise. I'm just going to ignore them at the moment, which is also deliberate. Oh, this is going to be fun. Your scroll thing's the reverse of what I usually use. Yeah, I'm playing in hard mode. All right, who's familiar with GitHub Issues? Yep, okay, cool. If you're not, GitHub Issues is kind of the way that we track a piece of work. So issues, the word issue, as we use it, is a thing that we need to care about, ultimately. It's fine, I'll work it out. Okay, oh yeah. It's a thing we need to care about, right? It's not a bug. It's not a synonym for a bug, although you can absolutely track your bugs using GitHub Issues. We use issues internally for everything at GitHub. So in our DevRel organization, we have a repository that has very little code in it, but we use issues to track all of the work that everybody is doing the whole way through. And you'll see some of the planning and tracking tools and why it's valuable to do that, regardless of whether they're actual pieces of code that you need to change or not. So the GitHub Issues UI, when you go to the Issues tab in GitHub, you would just get this list of all of the issues that are in there, categorized by open and closed. You can do some great searching and filtering and stuff like that, apply labels, all that kind of thing. And so the experience with actually creating issues and using issues is pretty good too. So if we create an issue, you can give it a title. What's the title? Fix that laptop output. which is a good one. And then you can put a whole lot of detail about stuff. What's the screenshot in Windows? Windows Shift S? Yeah. I'm a pro. You can even do things like paste images. Wrong keys. You can even copy and paste images. So I just took a screenshot, and then the preview can see that screenshot that I just took. So you can copy paste images. You can do rich markdown formatting, all that kind of stuff. There's some really good features around task lists too. So you can set a list of things you need to do. Second thing, and then when you save or submit that issue, let's just get rid of that last one. You can see that there's a task list attached to this issue as well. And we can see that there are 2 tasks for that issue that need to be done. And maybe I want to say I've done the first thing, but maybe the second thing needs a little bit more work. And so I can just need to refresh. Wrong buttons, F5. No, that's all right. See, this is why I have a desktop PC at home and a MacBook, so I know both of them. Anyway, so this second one, maybe I want to actually convert that to an issue because it needs some more expansion, there's some more details. When I do that, it'll create an issue from that second thing. And if I drill into that issue, we can see that that is tracked in one of the previous issues. So we have this kind of hierarchy. The hierarchy stuff in GitHub Issues is still kind of being built out. It'll be a lot richer in the future. Right now, we kind of do have this hierarchy between, and you can go down as deep as you want. If I did a task list in this and converted them to issues, you can see that it's tracked in those ones as well. That stuff will start surfacing a bit more soon. So we've got our issues. We can do really rich markdown. We can even do mathematical formulas, and we use tooling to do flowcharts and stuff like that. You can put in there in markdown. It's this GitHub flavored markdown that we have, which is a little bit richer. But this probably isn't the best way to manage all of your issues. You might have thousands of issues. You can't really run a sprint just by, well, you can run a sprint by just applying a label to that issue for sprint 1 and then just filtering to those labels. It's not the best way to work. So we've got we've got GitHub Projects. Now GitHub Projects is new. If you have used GitHub Projects in the past, you might have used the legacy projects, which we've now deprecated. There is a really nice migration path from the old projects to the new projects. Mish just did a video on that really recently. I don't know where have we published it on YouTube?
It's
on Instagram today. There we go. And so I'm going to create a new project. I'm going to go to the organization to create a project. Where are we? New project. And we'll call it DDD Perth. Now, I can choose one of the templates for these projects, or I can just go from scratch. I'm just going to go from scratch just to show you how powerful this is. And I'm going to add the issues from my repository. So to do that, by the way, we're looking at the table view at the moment. To add an issue, I choose my repository. It's Haikus for Codespaces. And then I'm just going to choose, that one. So now I have that issue in there. Oh, this thing's hurting me. And I can add left click. We've also made this quite keyboard friendly. So I'm just kind of hitting enter and it's taking the top one each time just to fill them out. And we've now got this list of issues that we're working with. We've got our columns, we've got assignees, we've got the status of those issues as well. Now, status is something that belongs to the board. So by default, you get to do, in progress, and done. But I can change those statuses. I can have whatever statuses I want. But I can also have custom fields in here. So I can say I want to see the labels. That's great. That's pretty useful. But I want a new field for an estimate. And then that field type is a number. And now we have this estimate column as well. So I'm just going to go and put some random numbers in that estimate column, if I can work things. I'm putting random numbers in because this is like a real life demo where estimates are totally random anyway. And then I can obviously do things like filter and say I only want to see the estimates that are greater than 5. Oh, keyboard shortcuts. the opposite. So Control K on Windows, by the way, not Windows K. And I can filter by, what do we got? Estimate, and just say it has to be greater than 5, and it will filter based on those. So we can do that. We can group by these statuses, group by the labels. Let's group by, actually we need another field here for sprint. And this is actually a iteration type. And it starts today. Iterations go for 2 weeks. So in the background, it's created some iterations for me based on every 2 weeks. And I can assign these to these sprints as we go as well. So yeah, let's do that. And then we'll group by these. So now we've got all of our sprint 1, sprint 2, sprint 3, and then the ones that haven't been done yet. So we've got this nice little table view. The other thing we might want to do though is have a sprint board, right? So let's create a new view. And this view is going to be a board view. And so now we have our board for all the ones with no status. So by default, it's kind of given me the status. So to do, doing, done. None of these have a status, so I obviously want some of them over here. But actually, this is my sprint board, so I'm going to filter by sprint, and then just say the current sprint. So you can say, this is the current sprint, or the previous sprint, or the next sprint. You can even say current +2, or previous -1, or something like that, which is pretty handy. And then you can work with these sprint boards as well. You can change what's on the cards. I mean, this is a demo that I could spend hours and hours on if I could work the mouse. One thing to note as well is that these projects are at the organization level. So we understand that you might have issues across a number of different repos for a project, especially if you have a microservices situation where you have a different repo for your different services, but you want this roll-up view of all of the things that are going on at the moment. So at the org level, you have a project, and you pull in the issues that you care about for that project across the different repositories. Or maybe pull in the pull requests, because you care about them as well. So issues and pull requests can appear here. You can also have the same issue in multiple projects, and those projects can have different custom fields. So here I've got a bunch of work that's going on. Maybe my managers want a different view of all of the epics in my organization across multiple projects, and they also have some fields they want to track, like maybe they just want a current status of red, green, and yellow or something like that. That extra field belongs to that project, and the issue can set that value on the project. So you can have different views of the same information. The great thing about this, though, is you can absolutely customize this for however you want. You don't need to, you're not stuck in the way that GitHub thinks you should run a project. You can do it any way you want. The one thing I didn't show you on this, which I love, is that you can also put in draft issues. So I can add one here to say, I don't know, get a new laptop. There's a theme for these issues, by the way. And this is a draft issue because it doesn't belong to a repository yet. It just belongs to this project. We have teams in GitHub who use basically nothing but draft issues. They do everything as draft issues, and it's only when they actually need to do the work that they will convert to an issue. And then it will ask you what repository you want that issue in, because it has to belong to a repository at that stage. So look, I could go on and on about all of this sort of stuff. Before I move on to kind of moving on from the planning, any questions about stuff that I haven't shown you on here? Anyone want to give me a laptop? Hand staying down. Okay. So look, this is also free for everybody. We don't charge anything for GitHub projects, so your own repositories you can do it, or your own organizations, your own accounts, you can have projects as well. Anything you like, there's no extra money for this. There's some other features that I didn't show you as well to do with like workflows. So when an issue gets dragged into the done column, then mark it as closed in the repo and things like that. Or sorry, other way around. A bunch of things like that. There's more coming to workflows as well. There's also Insights that is, I don't know if it's public preview yet. I think it's in the public beta, Insights, so you can do your burn down charts or burn up cumulative flow diagrams or the manager stuff as well. Somebody from GitHub in the back is looking at me like, I don't know if that's public.
Yeah, no, so the burnout charts and stuff you can use at the org level. For an individual one, they're not really available yet.
Yeah, so at org level for the, yeah, okay, there we go. So the burn up charts and stuff are at the enterprise, right? Or org level burn up charts, yeah.
Yeah, and it's available for everyone to use.
Cool. Awesome, all right, let's go back to this code. And we're going to do some of this work, all right? So I don't know if anybody here had the same experience as me with my first dev job, is it took literally about a month before I could actually write code on the code base because they had to find me a computer and then they had to set that computer up with the standard operating environment, and then the project I was on had these other dependencies that I needed in there as well. So, you know, time to actually writing the first code or making the first commit was long, right? Which is a problem, especially if you are on multiple projects. I don't know if anybody's skipped from one project to another and there's this period of how do I get all this stuff working? They're using different versions of the dependencies, all that kind of stuff. It's also bad for open source and for contributing to other projects. Inner source is a problem as well. So I know when I worked at Microsoft, everyone at Microsoft, every engineer at Microsoft has access to almost every repository, every code base. And you're encouraged, if you find something that you need in somebody else's code base, to submit a pull request, like to actually go and change it, look at their code, see how it works. Which is great, except I can't debug that because they've got this huge list of dependencies. I can't get that working. It's not worth my time, so I just don't do it. Enter Codespaces. So Codespaces is a dev environment in the cloud that's targeted at a specific repository. So you basically have the definition of what's required to write code for a project defined alongside the code for that project. Before Codespaces as well, if you just want to make a small change, you don't need to do any debugging or anything like that. Just in case anybody hasn't seen this before, this is in every repository. If you hit the dot button, presuming it's the same on a different laptop, the full stop button, dot button, period, whatever you want to call it, on any GitHub repo, even if it's not yours, it'll open the web editor, which is basically Visual Studio Code running in your browser. So there's no compute on the back end in this case, it's just running inside your browser. And you can make changes to the code. You can not debug, but you can submit a code change. You can submit a pull request. You can do all of that kind of stuff. Yeah, so you can make small changes. I actually use this constantly. Like if I need to make a small change to a README or something like that, I'll just hit dot, open it up in here. This is also really, really good for code reviews. So if somebody submits a pull request and you go to the pull request page and hit the dot, you're brought to Visual Studio Code, to the web editor or web-based editor, in the context of looking at that pull request. So you can see the changes, you can see what was committed, the files that are different, and you can leave comments and say, this looks good. If you have permissions, you can even merge those pull requests in the context of a Visual Studio Code instance. So you can see the library, you can see all the files, you can see everything like that. But like I said, what you can't do here, unfortunately, is debug, especially if you don't know the shortcut keys. So there's no terminal because there's no compute in the background. I can't do any run and debug stuff because there's no compute in the background. And obviously in the real world, you need to do that stuff. So Codespaces is basically the same as this, except it has compute. It's a cloud-based dev environment. Now, because we're short on time, normally I'd create a new one to show you how quickly this works. But if you go to the code button here and then go to Codespaces, and I've got one here, which is not clean. That's great. Oh, you know what? I'm just going to create a new code space. So you can see how fast it is. So what it is doing is it's spinning up a container in the cloud that's running on a machine that has whatever resources I need to give it. There are a number of sizes for these code spaces as well. So you can do 2 core machines up to, I think it's 32 core if you ask us nicely. I think by default you can do anything up to 32 core machines, I believe. And they get charged basically per minute. So they get charged based on usage. The good thing as well is if you leave them, you log out and you don't do anything, you don't stop them, they'll stop themselves after a period of time. I think by default it's 20 or 30 minutes. It'll stop itself. We did an internal survey because, fun story, GitHub, so github.com, which is a mono repo, which is about 11 gig of code. We do github.com entirely in Codespaces. So we use this internally for our own gigantic repo. Using some features like pre-builds, so we can, oh, that's good. So using some features like pre-builds, we can get the speed of starting a new code space down to really, really small numbers. So, if this works, I'll show you that in a sec, but for github.com, 11 gig code base, about 23 gig on disk if you do a deep clone, takes about, I think it's about 10 seconds, 10, 12 seconds to go from clicking the button to being able to debug the code with multiple containers running different services in a debugging environment, and you can commit code and do that work straight away. It's super powerful. And it also means if somebody new joins the team, they just create a new code space and they can write code immediately. If you start working on a different project and they have code spaces set up there, you can go to that other project, start a code space, and now you have this brand new dev machine that's targeted specifically at that repository and at that code base. So here we go. We are in, and this is my little application. Let's see if I can run it and debug. It's a Node app, so I'll choose Node. And remember, this is all running just through my browser. I don't have this code base on this machine, on this laptop at all. Not just for the obvious reasons that it's not my laptop. This actually makes the demo kind of cool, right? You know I don't have the code on here because it's not my machine. But I'm still able to do the work, to write the code. So this is what the application looks like. If I go back into my code space, again in the browser, and I find a file, let's find index.js, get rid of that, and then I'll put a breakpoint on that render, and refresh. And in my other browser tab, I've hit this breakpoint. And you get all of the nice stuff that you would normally get debugging in a VS Code instance on somebody else's computer or on a Raspberry Pi, wherever you are, right? So pretty cool stuff. I was going to do a tiny little Copilot demo, but instead you should go to Mish's talk at 3:15, I think, where she's going to do Copilot entirely. But I was going to randomize those haikus, but I don't remember how to do it. So I would do something like, I'd need to install Copilot, so I'm not going to do it. Just ask Copilot to tell me how to randomize in Node, because I don't know. Right, so that's Codespaces. It's super powerful. You can also connect remotely from a Visual Studio Code instance on your local machine if you want to. You can stop them, start them, disconnect, and have multiple running at the same time. So if you are doing some work for one particular branch of your code, you can have a code space open for that and another one for the main one and so on. And as I said, they'll stop themselves if you're not using them. We did a little survey internally for GitHub to find out how often people actually stopped the code spaces themselves, or how often they just turned their computer off and waited for it to stop itself. And it was approximately, there might be a little bit of counting error, approximately 100% of people didn't turn it off. They just let it expire. So, So that's a very good point I overheard there, which is that's because they work at GitHub and they don't pay for these, which is true. I did a little back of the envelope calculation, and if you're running, I think it's a 16 core machine or something like that, and you're working 8 hours a day, 50 weeks a year or 48 weeks a year or something like that, It's about equivalent to buying a new laptop every 2 years or something like that. But remember, you've got these code spaces that you can have in all of these different environments, and they just don't charge you for usage when they're shut down. So you could have 30 projects that you're working on with 30 different code spaces that you can start working on immediately from any laptop you have. It doesn't need to be new. You should definitely have the newest, best laptop though. That's a good idea. Yeah. So, I'm running low on time as well, so we're going to move very quickly to the next bit. So that's kind of our inner loop. That's a dev environment that means that I can write my code really quickly, I can get started on new projects, and I don't have to worry so much about the hardware or the dependencies running on my local machine. Super powerful. But then when I have made the change, how do I get that into production? And this is one of the probably better known features, I guess, of GitHub, which is GitHub Actions. Who uses GitHub Actions? Okay, probably about half the room. Who's heard of GitHub Actions? Like, who's aware of it? The same people. Well, now the rest of you have heard about it, so you can move into the next column of using it. Rather than actually run one of these, I'm going to show you one I've run before. So the great thing about GitHub Actions is the definition of how to build your application and how to deploy your application is defined in a YAML file that sits alongside your code. So when somebody clones or forks your repository, they know not just what the code looks like, but what the build situation is and what the deployment situation is. They can see all of that. If you've got a specific code space definition set up, so you can customize those code spaces in huge ways, they also know what the dev machine needs to look like as well. Whether you're using code spaces or dev containers just locally, you know everything about that project. You have the code, you have the definition of how you're going to write code against it, like what dependencies you need, and then you have the definition of how you build it and how you deploy it, and it's just all there in your repository. This is kind of a more mature looking pipeline. We've got 3 stages here. I'm going to try and zoom in a bit. I don't think this zooms great here. There we go. We've got 3 stages here. We've got a build stage, which does my compilation. And we have a deployment stage, which deploys to Azure in this case. And then we have a production stage. Now the thing that I've set up with production is it knows the production environment needs approvals before it goes to production. So by saying in that definition, I'm deploying to production, you get this protection where it has to pass a bunch of rules before it's allowed to go into production. In this case, that rule is I need to approve that before it goes into production. You can put other rules in there like you can only deploy to this environment from these branches of your repository. So maybe you're doing a branching strategy where it's a trunk-based development and people do feature branches, but then they merge back into your main branch before it goes out to production. You want to make sure nobody deploys to production from a feature branch, right? So you can put that protection on it as well, and nobody can actually approve that to go to production. So this went to the staging site, it went to the production site. We've got a track of the deployments, like the reviews, sorry, who did a review. And then we've even got the artifacts that were produced as well. So part of the build was packaging everything up and then uploading it so the subsequent jobs could pull that down and do the work, actually deploy them as well. The way these actually physically run is on, these ones are on GitHub hosted runners. So these are agents that basically spin up when there's a job to do. It'll download the code or do whatever you want it to do. And then when it's finished, it'll tear itself down entirely. So they're on-demand kind of hosted runners. You can also self-host runners if you want. You can run the runner executable on pretty much any machine. I've run them on Raspberry Pis too. So you can actually build your application on a Raspberry Pi if you really want to. Don't do that. Or you can do the GitHub hosted ones. Really new to GitHub hosted runners as well is the larger sizes of GitHub hosted runners. So for a very long time, you didn't get to choose how big those runners were. The only way to choose how much RAM and all that kind of stuff was to do your self-hosted ones. Now for GitHub Team, I believe, and GitHub Enterprise Cloud, you can set up larger hosted runners to say, I want one with 32 cores and GPUs and all sorts of stuff. So yeah, long-running builds or ones that are a bit slow, you can use hosted runners for those. Now, there is a lot that I didn't cover in this for several reasons. If you want to see any of this stuff in a little bit more detail, We've got demos at the booth. We've got an awesome demo that was actually written by Aaron Powell, who is probably in that room, which has a code space with multiple containers that get run and debug at the same time with Azure Cosmos DB emulators running in them. And the actual device that the keyboard and mouse is connected to is this little Raspberry Pi. But it's running 32 cores in the background and 32 gigs of RAM in Codespaces and things like that. We use GitHub Issues for our prize draw as well, if you haven't signed up for that. So if you go to a particular GitHub issue, you can leave a comment, and then we use GitHub Actions to pull the names of the people who commented on that issue, put them in a file, and do that as part of the deployment to GitHub Pages that I also didn't mention, which is a way you can host your own static websites in GitHub. So the whole thing kind of fits together until you get this end-to-end scenario. So planning and tracking with GitHub Issues and GitHub Projects. Codespaces for that inner loop of actually doing development really quickly and really efficiently, especially for new people to the team. And then GitHub Actions, which is an automation platform that kind of lets you do your CI/CD or kind of any other automation as well, but fantastic for CI/CD. And we've got most of the way around there until we get back to issues again, which is the learning from what's in production. As I said, tons of stuff I didn't tell you about. Come over to the booth and ask some of us for some demos of the stuff that's there. And otherwise, thanks so much for your time. And thanks, Mish, for the laptop.
Thanks, Damian. That was really cool. So it's off to lunch now, everybody. So there's lunchtime sessions commencing at 2:35.